So for our topic, we decided to do our Pecha Kucha on conference realignment, which is a topic that is a pretty controversial one when we look at the full landscape. There's a lot of good. There's also some bad, and Eli and I will break it down throughout this presentation. So we'll send it off to Eli to get us started with what is conference realignment.
Over the years, universities have changed conferences a lot for a multitude of different reasons. The most recent round of conference realignment appears to be related to media deals, and teams are leaving conferences to get more money in a different conference. Conferences were originally regionally based conferences, meaning all the teams were from the same general area of the country. Due to lack of TV stations, and it was easier to get to these schools apart from schools that are on the other side of the country, it made it a lot more plausible for athletic departments to play teams that were close. There's this big need for bigger matchups in the regular season, and it'll create more money and more viewers to watch the games. I think that's why you saw additions that didn't necessarily regionally make sense, like UCLA and USC joining the Big Ten, and I think you'll continue to see teams add things that don't necessarily regionally make sense. Conferences were originally regionally based conferences, meaning all the teams were from the same general area of the country. Due to lack of TV stations, and it was easier to get to these schools apart from schools that are on the other side of the country, it made it a lot more plausible for athletic departments to play teams that were close. With conference realignment, we've seen a lot more competitive balance because teams that have done well and dominated their division, they now have the opportunity to move to a higher division. The most recent example of this is James Madison, who was one of the better teams in the FCS, moved to the Sun Belt this year in the FBS and finished 8-3. Next, we assessed 4 conferences, and we classified them as winners, losers, or survivors. We studied the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. We had the Big Ten and the SEC as winners of conference realignment, the Pac-12 as losers, and the Big 12 as survivors of conference realignment. The first conference we studied was the Big Ten. They've added USC and UCLA, and they recently signed a new media deal worth $7 billion, which will be around $62 million to each university per year. And it looks like they're continuing to look to add new universities. The next conference we studied was the SEC. The SEC's recently added the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma to their conference. And it looks like they're continuing to look to add new markets to their conference and new universities. They recently signed their newest media deal in 2020.
So a team that I'd consider a survivor in this mix is the Big 12. The Big 12, what they did best was hawking the group of 5 teams that were available, such as Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, or UCF. And this allowed them to be able to maintain a decent value deal, which should allow them to stay afloat with some of the top teams in college football. So as for the Pac-12, they are a conference on the decline. One of the problems is that big companies aren't going to put a lot of investment into a conference that really lost its star power. UCLA, USC, those LA markets were the big money makers, and they did not have any teams that they added to try to create some more competitive balance. Switching gears from the top players in college football, let's talk about some of these smaller schools. Eli mentioned earlier about how some teams have benefited moving to the Sun Belt. Well, small schools, they have the upside to make a lot more revenue by joining bigger conferences in their own right, such as teams from the American gaining more money in the Big 12. Boise State is a team that was in the FCS until 1997, then moved up to the FBS, and they've been able to make a lot of money due to their investment in the football program. Their deal in the FBS with the Mountain West Conference guarantees just under $4 million a year, much more than what they get in the FCS. Now, switching just from football, we have some of the less commercialized sports, networks such as ESPN Plus and Big Ten Network Plus, SEC Network Plus, ACC Network. These subscription services allow more broadcasts to go down and more content to be generated by schools. So conference realignment can even generate high caliber matchups in smaller sports. In conclusion, college sports, it is a very dynamic entity that is always ever changing. As a result, having conference realignment allows the NCAA to be able to monetize it well and really increase competitive balance and be able to maximize the amount of profits they can make based off media of these sports.